Welcome to this session today, FedRAMP 20X, or the F word as it's become affectionately known in my vocabulary and social channels. It refers to a program which I think is a bit of a mini revolution. I have Matt Hungate from Shellman and Mikhail Kipnis, one of the geniuses of my team, joining me today. And we're going to delve into the whole subject of FedRAMP 20X. It's a torrid child of the family in a way. It was kind of rejected from its first point when agencies said, no, we're not going to follow it, we are going to challenge it. And now it's almost come full circle into the limelight as being the darling of our industry. It looks like it might well take out CMMC and other standards and leave them in its wake. It's very much a space that excites a lot of us in this GRC and compliance world of ours. For many of us, FedRAMP was an untouchable standard, an absolute nightmare if I'm being honest. You needed huge amounts of money, you needed sponsors, and for many, including myself, it was viewed as archaic, heavily reliant on binary controls and on a lot of documentation and not future-proofed in any way, shape or form. And that's where I wanted to launch this conversation. So Matt, Mikhail, if you want to introduce yourself, then I will start firing away with my questions. So let's start with you, Matt. Who are you?
Hi, everyone. And yeah, thanks for having me, Jake and team. So my name is Matt Hungate, managing principal at Shellman. So I help oversee our federal practice, which includes FedRAMP. And I also had the pleasure of working with the Anecdotes team on their 20X journey. So yeah, happy to be here and talking shop about everything that's kind of going on in the FedRAMP world these days.
Thanks, Matt. And Mikhail.
Hi, Jake. Hi, Matt. Thank you very much for having me. I'm the InfoSec manager in your team and Jake's team at Anecdotes, and I'm responsible for everything to do with the security the implementation side of things, including FedRAMP 20X, which we're here to talk about.
Which is either his favorite or least favorite topic, depending on which day you ask him. So Matt, starting again with you, I obviously am passionate and think that FedRAMP 20X is a revolution in the compliance industry. I think it's the start of a wave that leads to data-led, automation-driven compliance across all standards. But I'm not an auditor. So in your world, is this good? Is it more work or less work for you? Do you get greater levels of assurance versus lower levels of assurance? Is it harder to work with the clients? Do you need different staff to do it? Talk to me about the audit perspective on 20X.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on it in your intro. I think one of the biggest challenges that not just CSPs dealt with the legacy Rev 5 version of FedRAMP is related to kind of the documentation burden, right? So that was also a burden on the 3PAO or auditor side, where there's massive amounts of documentation that we had to sift through in order to validate whether a control was in place, in addition to actually validating the security of that control, right? So I think when we look at the shift, what I'm most excited about is kind of the investment shift from the documentation piece into the engineering and automation piece. So that's I think one of the biggest fundamental differences we're seeing with 20X. And I think from an investment perspective, it's not necessarily going to be less money or time from the CSP side. It's going to be a difference on where you're going to be spending that. That's what we've been seeing from a lot of our clients. I'm sure you and your team experienced that as well, where FedRAMP is still not an easy button by any means. There's still a lot of work and time that needs to go into automation and pipeline capabilities. But the difference is you're actually getting value out of these assessments now, and that these validations, where previously there was a lot of investment spent into developing the documentation and maintaining it, which you just didn't get a whole lot of value out of, both from the CSP side and the auditor side.
We've talked about how 20X has changed the industry. We've talked about how it's changing intentionally the auditor's approach and the type of people that you need. We've talked about the degree of assurance it gives. Let's talk about the future. Now, it seems, at least, it's been publicly stated that Rev 5 will be sunsetted in the very near future. There's definitely talk about the impact of FedRAMP 20X on CMMC, ISO, and other standards. What's your take on that? What's the timelines, and how do you think it's going to play for those already in the FedRAMP space?
The timeline that FedRAMP has defined as of today, right, it's June 11th, 2027. That is when they're going to be basically cutting off all new FedRAMP certifications for Rev 5. So unless you're already in active conversations with an agency that has said they're going to be sponsoring you, it probably makes sense to start building towards 20X, right? So that is kind of the message that FedRAMP and Pete has made very clear.
Mikhail, let's move on to you. So you wrote a LinkedIn post that semi-supported and semi-slated me as an individual. I gave you a challenge and said, work out a way to get us to FedRAMP, and not very much timeline and not very much information. Anecdotes obviously went through a journey from having never touched federal compliance to being authorized as moderate or Class C, as it's now called in 20X lingo, as part of that Phase 2 pilot program. So talk about the journey from the moment you've never seen federal compliance before and going from nothing to this point. Talk about the lessons that you learned, the speed bumps along the way, and whatever else you want to throw in.
As you said, you actually told me about a half a year ago, 6 months or 8 months. Hey, listen, there's a new program called 20X. It's FedRAMP, and we're going to do it. And I don't come from the GRC space. I've been at Anecdotes for a couple of years. This is the first time at Anecdotes that I meet the field of the documentation side of things. I'm always the implementation side of things, and always the engineer, always the solution builder. So 20X, in my view, was a perfect fit for me, for my capabilities. Problem was, it was a pilot, and it was ever changing. And the struggle that I had as an individual, or call it a GRC engineer, me as a company, as a security practitioner, was first understand what exactly FedRAMP wants. And because their description and their requirements were vague on purpose, because it was a pilot phase and it was shaping the program itself to bring it to the 21st century.
I want to double click on a couple of things that you said. One is 6 months, which traditionally a time frame for FedRAMP, Matt, it's like 18 to 24 months?
So the timeline in the legacy FedRAMP process was extremely variable. It would not have been unheard of to reach kind of the upper end of 24 months. So it's a much quicker time to market, and I think that's a huge benefit that I think we're also seeing as well.
So, Mikhail, you did it a quarter of the time and you have no GRC background, and that draws me to a point. Pete Waterman, who runs FedRAMP 20X, for those who don't know, has given this statement several times in multiple places where he said compliance is an engineering problem. You start by saying, I'm an engineer. That was the first point that you made, and it's a key point of your thesis, and I think it's an interesting point. I want to ask you one final question. When we interacted with FedRAMP, it felt different. You've obviously been involved in ISO and SOC and other programs and projects too. But this felt like a different audit process. It felt almost like a software development relationship where we showed them things and they said, well, I like the direction, I like the approach, but show us how you do that, or show us what the results and outcomes of that look like, and go and rework that for us in this way. It felt like an iterative thing where you're actually building compliance together rather than being tested on your score amongst or against a common criteria set. Is that the kind of feeling you got too? Or was I alone in that?
That's exactly what it was. I had a peer in my journey. The peer was the assessor, not the auditor. So the assessor, their role has changed. They can help us. They can guide us. They can get their own experience with all other CSPs that they, go through this journey with, and get me their insights from past lessons learned from other people and other teams that did it.
It was fascinating to watch actually how you went through this, because I said from afar, from someone who comes from both a technical and a compliance background, at this point seeing how you took it on from a purely kind of software development iterative approach was really interesting and really effective. I think to try and kind of wrap this conversation, there's a couple of lessons learned here. Like I said, Anecdotes went from 0 to hero in 6 months to Class C or moderate authorization, which in itself is astounding. I don't think that anyone has done it on such a small amount of resources or time frame as we did, and I'd be confident that no one can argue against that statement. I think there's two main reasons for that. I think number one is using Shellman, not to flatter them, but the team and Avni have been quite forward thinking and gone hard on 20X from day one, putting the people and the approaches in place to support and enable companies to go through these pilots. In fact, I think they did most of the pilots. And then on our side, number two, Mikhail's approaching this as an engineering problem and finding technical solutions rather than trying to solve a requirement, trying to solve problems that underpin the requirement one by one. We built actual solutions that were foundations that you can build upon. They're scalable, they're long lasting, and they don't need reviewing on a cadence of 6 to 12 months as the audit comes. So for me, We go back to where we started. 20x is a revolution because it takes the compliance world from archaic history, documentation, and binary controls to pipelines, AI, and real-time JSON files that show actual compliance posture here and now. It's amazing that federal compliance was the first domain that went there. And I think this is the start, the beginning of a massive revolution. So thank you, Matt, for your thoughts. Thank you, Mikhail, for your thoughts, and also for the hellish 6 months that I put you through. I hope this is really interesting for those that are engaged and have listened. If you want to learn more about our journey, about Shellman's offerings, about FedRAMP, or about anything else related to 20x, about the challenges that we face or that you might face too, the joys, the tears that were shared, then please reach out to any of us directly via all known channels. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening.